Okay, so today we're going to have a look at some algebraic expressions, or just expressions as they're normally known, okay? But before we have a look at what these actually mean, it's worth thinking about what they actually are, okay? So algebraic expressions, or an expression, okay, is just a combination, okay, of letters, so something like A, something like X, numbers, so 3, 5, anything like that, and terms, okay? It's a combination of them together. So something like 3x plus 5, that is an expression, okay? That is an expression. Something like 3x on its own is an expression, okay? Now, each one of these that we have is a variable, okay? And it makes up each part of it. Now, we have expressions. We also have things then that are slightly different, okay? And this is what we've just got to check we don't get confused with. If we've got something like 3x plus 5 equals 2, that is an equation, okay? As soon as it's got that equal sign, it's an equation, okay? It's an equation rather than an expression. So that equal sign changes everything, okay? We also have what we call identities, where one side is equal to the other, and they'll just be written in different ways. So something like 6x plus 3, and sometimes it's done with 3, a little 3 for the equals, and then you might have 3 upon 2x plus 1. When I expand this bracket, I get that. Okay, that is an identity. A formula is a rule, a formula to equate something. So something like, if you're finding the area of a circle, area equals pi r squared. That is a formula, okay, rather than an equation, because you're putting different things in, different variables in. Okay, now what we can do with algebraic expressions is we can explain loads of different things. So if we start, let's start basic, okay? If we start with just something like x, okay, I'm going to call x is going to be my variable, okay? I'm going to stick with x throughout most of this because it's the easiest letter. It's used quite often. X for unknown. I write it like this because that's how you write algebraic x's. I also like to write it like that because if I was doing something like this one, so 3 times x, you can tell the difference between the times sign and the x. Now 3 times x, okay, there is no point me writing this times sign, okay? That times sign doesn't need to be there. So what I can just write that as is 3x. Okay, if I had 5 times x, I just have 5x. If I had 20 times x, I just have 20x. Okay, and that is probably the first thing you need to know when it comes to simplifying expressions and forming expressions, okay? That when you're multiplying your expression by a number, you just get rid of the times sign, okay? So if we start with that, we've got that bit. Now, it can get a little bit more complicated with, instead of me having a number times x, I might have x times x. Okay, so think back to when we have a number times a number, okay? If we've got a number multiplied by itself, what do we call them? Have a think. Yeah, we call them square numbers, okay? Square numbers, so things like 1 times 1, which gives us 1, 2 times 2, gives us 4. They're square numbers, okay? So x times x, well, that gives us x squared, okay? So then if I had x times x times x, I've got, well, this time it's not squared, it's going to be x cubed. Okay, and that is probably one of the second things to know about is actually, okay, I've got my x times x gives me x squared, x times x times x gives me x cubed. Okay, now other things that you can have, sorry, that board's a bit disgusting. It gets a little bit more complicated, okay, because you could have something like 3x times x. Okay, now when you've got something like this, your x and your x are times together. And well, if we just look back to what we had a minute ago, you can just about see it. X times x equals x squared. So I know that bit. And if you imagine, there is almost like an imaginary 1 there. So I'm doing 3 times 1. And 3 times 1 just gives me 3. So I end up with 3x squared. Okay, now I'm not always going to multiply. Okay, I'm not always going to multiply. I've just shown you loads where I multiply. I could divide. Okay, I could divide. I could have, if I had something like x divided by 2, you'll sometimes see this written like that, x over 2. You might have something like 3 divided by x, and you would see it written like 3 over x. We write it as a fraction, okay? And a lot of people don't realise, but that fraction line is actually a division line. That's what it means. It means that it's x divided by 2. If you think about it, a half, you're splitting it in half. You're dividing it by 2. If you have a third, you're splitting it in 3. You're dividing it by 3. Okay, so we can have divisions. The other thing that we can have is just basically addition and subtraction. Okay, so we could have something like x take away 2. And that is an expression. Okay, now what could make it more complicated is you might have something like 3 times all of this. You might even have different letters involved. Okay, so you could have something like x upon xy. Now these brackets, okay, they mean everything inside the bracket is multiplied by what's outside. So I could have something like this. I could do x times x, which would give me, so I said x times x, that's going to be x squared. Okay, and it's also then multiplied by the y. So what I end up with is this x squared y. Okay, because it doesn't actually change the y, but this x is being multiplied by this xy. And you get things like that. Okay, now hopefully that at least gives you a start to what you are expecting with these. Okay, as I say, the main things probably are this one here. Okay, if you can get the idea of timesing, if you can get that, and if you can think about the division and think about addition and subtraction with it, then you will be able to do these and will be able to form these. Okay, so I hope that helps. Have a look at it. Have a look at some of the questions. See if you can have a go and keep up the good work.